Welcome to Small Talk Daily for Wednesday, February 24th, 2010. This morning I'd like to go through the process of reporting a bug in Cincom Smalltalk because it's something that a lot of people need to be able to do, but we often get incomplete or not terribly useful information on the first go-round. What I'd like to go through this morning is pretty much what kind of information we want and how you might acquire it. So to do that, I'm going to use bottom feeder as an example, the idea here being that this is a stand-in for your application, and a problem I'm going to show right now, not really a real problem, a simulated one, is something that illustrates potentially a bug in the system. So let's go ahead and I'm going to try to add a feed to this. I'm going to put in something that isn't going to work because there's no RSS feed behind this. So I'm going to hit this. It's going to respond to me that couldn't deal with that. For the purposes of simulation, I'm going to assume that this illustrates a bug in the XML parser in VisualWorks and that I think that's something that needs to be reported. At that point, what I need to do is find a small test case, a small amount of code that would illustrate this problem so that I can report it to the support folks at Cincom and let them be able to reproduce this problem with the smallest amount of effort possible. Now, if I go into my code browser, you'll find that here is the actual method that button press invokes, and there's a lot of stuff here. I finally get down to this private add feed, and I might think that that's illustrating what's happening, but that goes through a number of processes as well. There's a lot of exception handling happening, and I need to boil this down to the point where the actual thing happens. So what I'm going to do is, rather than dredge through this by doing senders and implementers, what I'm going to do is show you, cut to the chase and show you where you get to. So moving this aside, I come in here to my workspace, and this is a small test case. I have this little method here. I hand it an URL, I get a document, and that should be the XML document itself. And if that doesn't work, well, then I know there's a problem somewhere. In this case, the problem is it's not an XML document, but let's presume, again, for the sake of simulation, that it is, and that I'm illustrating some problem. So I highlight this, and I'm going to do it on this entire little mass of code, which is my small reproducible test case, and I get an exception. And the exception here is, of course, a valid one. There's no XML name. But at this point, if this were illustrating a real system problem, there's a couple of things that we're going to want on the back end of this. One, we're going to want the stack. Now, you can debug this, and to debug this, you would go into the debugger and attempt to identify, is this my problem or is it a Cincom problem? If you can identify that this is your problem instead, you should probably fix it. If you get through this and think it's our problem, by all means report it. And one of the things you need to report is this little mass of code here, this reproducible test case you were able to construct by going back through the system code and finding the smallest segment of code that can reproduce your problem. And with that reproducible test case, you can do this, copy stack. Now, ideally, that would put this in a file. It doesn't. It puts it in the paste buffer. So if I come over here and do a page new on this, I can now do an Apple V. I'm on a Mac. And I'll come up here, and I see this huge mass of code here. This is showing me the stack that resulted in that exception window I was looking at. And this is stuff we'll also want. So down here is showing you all the processes that were running, the stack of execution that was happening when things were running, and this is highly useful information to our engineers. So the things you want to do, again, when you get the exception, try to find a reproducible test case. Come up with something like this, either in terms of an S-unit or a workspace script that can illustrate your bug in a concise fashion using code that doesn't require any extraneous libraries, or if it does, they're at least easily loadable by support. You don't need to be handing something off to support where you give them a convoluted procedure of load these 5 million things in this precise order and you'll be able to reproduce it. No, you need to boil it down to the smallest amount of code, the smallest amount of prerequisites possible, so that they can easily reproduce this without having to go through extreme effort. Because if it requires the equivalent of putting an entire system together, you might be getting into a training or services engagement. What you really want to do is you want to get something boiled down small. Also, copy that stack, put it in the email that you send to support so that the support engineers can look at this and see what happened. They'll be able to glean a lot more from this, and in particular, if they can't, they can hand it off to engineering, who can in turn glean even more than the support staff can. So that's the long and short of trying to get something useful and informational to support that will get the speediest resolution to your problem possible. Now, again, this may not be speedy because it may be a very involved problem, and I'm not going to make light of the fact that these test cases may be simple to come up with. They may not be. But as best as you can, come up with something like this. So that's about it for today. Until next time, have fun with small talk.